In this session, we're going to look at our Calculations tab, and this is our Needs Analysis calculations. So once you've entered the financial details, you then move to Next, and this will take you into the calculations. Now there's two ways you can do the calculations. Firstly is you can use our Needs Analysis calculator, or you can use the recommendation notepad. So I'm going to show you both options. However, the most popular and I think you'll find most useful is our Needs Analysis calculator. So let's have a look at the recommendation notepad. The recommendation notepad is probably the more traditional and simple way of working out insurance needs. And to be honest, I'd probably use it in unusual situations, where the client has several rental properties, or they live with an extended family, and they have perhaps more complicated needs. So let me just show you how we do this. So when I click on the recommendation notepad, the first thing it's going to do, it's going to pop up with a reminder or a bit of a warning to say that it's going to deduct the existing insurance cover which I've indicated as keep in the recommendation notepad. So I have to say yes to that in this situation. So just to remind you, back here when we looked at the client's existing cover, we said that there was some cover here with AIA that we're going to keep, and there was some cover here with Countdown that we were looking to replace. So in our Calculations tab, under the recommendation notepad, it will, and I'm going to open up the life insurance section, it is going to deduct the existing cover that we have with AIA that we said we were going to keep. Alright, so because we said we're going to keep that, it's coming off the total amount of cover that we are going to recommend. And I'm just going to show you how that works. If I add a new item to that list, I can do something like I want to cover the mortgage, and let's say their mortgage is $350,000, but let's say for example you don't have to have the same amount on both sides. So let's say for example if Jack passed away, Jill says look, she doesn't need to have the whole thing paid off. You can enter a different amount for those different needs if you wanted to. Let's add a few more items. So let's say for example they wanted to cover final expenses, and Jack wanted $20,000 to cover final expenses, but Jill, she's part of a larger family and she's got people overseas that probably come to the funeral. You can add that. If they want to leave money behind for their children's education, we can leave some money there. And so on, right? You can just keep adding more and more items, and again we've got a notes field if you want to put some comments or some notes around that. So if I minimize that, you can see it's added up the total amount that we're going to recommend for him and the total amount we are going to recommend for her. Likewise, I can go into the rest of these sections line by line and enter the amounts that I want to as part of my discussion with the clients to work out their insurance needs. Now the other way you can do this is you can run our Needs Analysis calculator, and although it looks a bit complicated at the start, but it is very simple and easy to use. Now with our Needs Analysis calculator, it has already pre-populated some figures in these fields. So how did it work this out? So for example for life cover we're recommending $300,000 for him and $409,000 for her. If we open up the box for life cover, we're going to do some calculations, and firstly we're going to look at clearing off some debts, providing for some final expenses or a funeral cost, and to provide or replace some ongoing income for your family. So the first thing we're going to do is pay off the debts, and it defaults to 100%. So over here it's calculated we're going to pay off the mortgage, we're going to pay off the credit card, and we're going to pay off the overdraft. Now I don't have to have 100%, I could change that to 50% for example if I wanted to. It is entirely your choice, but in the settings field it does default to 100%, so if you wanted to change these figures in the settings you are able to do so. The next thing we're going to look at is to pay for the cost of a funeral or final expenses, and again our default figure here is $20,000, but if you want to change that you are able to do so. To fund some education, indicate the number of children that they have, let's say 2 children, and then we enter in a figure of how much we want to leave behind per child. And if there are other uses, so for example if they wanted to leave some money behind for the SPCA or for a donation or to the church or whatever it may be, they can enter those figures in here. So this is our subtotal of our capital requirements or our lump sum needs. We're then going to look at replacing some ongoing income and how much we're going to look for and for how long. So to replace their income, there are three ways we can look at replacing their income. The first option is to look at replacing their income after debt repayments. So up here we've paid off the mortgage. So if we've paid off the family mortgage, we don't need to continue to cover those mortgage repayments. So therefore we can look at the client's gross income less their mortgage repayments. And that's all this calculation does, right? Their gross income less their mortgage repayments, because they're now debt-free, they don't need as much income as before. Okay, the other way you can look at this is you can calculate it based on full income. So we can look to replace the client's full income, or we can look to replace the client's full income less tax, right? So if I choose that box, it will deduct the tax off that. Or I can look at this option here, other income, and I can just enter a figure myself to work out a manual calculation. So what I'll do in this example, I'm just going to leave it at the default after debt repayments. And the next question we're going to look at is for how many years do we want this income to be replaced. Now default setting is for 2 years. However, if for example it's a young family, I could change that to a different figure. I could change for him 10 years and for her for 7 years. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work out what lump sum of capital we need to generate this income over this period of time. And we are going to do this based on a net interest rate of 3%, and we're going to assume we're going to live off the interest plus the capital. So after this period there is not going to be any money left, everything is going to be consumed. Now this 3% is based on the difference between our after-tax annual interest rate of 5% and our inflation rate of 2%. Now maybe in the current climate these figures don't seem that relevant, but please understand we're looking at a longer term average. We're looking over a 10-20 year period. But if you wanted to change these figures, you could change these figures to whatever the client wanted to. It doesn't matter, it just recalculates our net interest rate based on those assumptions. Our capital required for income is then calculated, and now we're going to take off some deductions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to deduct our existing cover that we said we're going to keep. So over here we said Jack was going to keep the $100,000 worth of life cover with AIA, so we are deducting that off the amount. Other deductions, so there are savings and other assets excluding their family home that we could look to liquidate. In the event of death, the balance of the KiwiSaver account is paid out. And if there's other assets that they're looking to sell or liquidate, you can add that into the list there as well. So we subtotal our capital that's on hand. We take our grand total less the deductions, and this is now how much life cover we are going to recommend for him and for her. And again, we've got a notes field if you want to put some notes with that. Now if I minimize that, you will see that the amount is entered under the life cover. I'm now going to jump down to income cover, and what we do here is we default to 75% of the client's gross income in terms of these calculations. If I wanted to put that cover or split that cover under mortgage protection, I could do so, and if I enter that amount in here, it will deduct off the income protection amount. So here for example we said 4688 for Jack. If I entered a figure of $2,000 a month under mortgage protection, because I want to split that up, it then works out the difference, and the income protection cover amount is 2688. So if you add that back up, you get back to our 4688. Medical insurance, it defaults to required, it defaults as to yes, and if I open that up, it's going to break it up into 4 sections. Do I want to cover for major medical expenses? The default option is yes. Do I want to cover for specialist and diagnostic tests? The default is yes. However, for GP prescriptions and dental and optical, the default is no. Now obviously you can change these around to whatever suits you and your client. Now in terms of trauma and TPD, the calculations work basically the same for both options. So let me just show you the trauma calculations. I'm going to open that up, and the first thing it does, it's going to default to a standalone option because we believe the standalone option is the better recommendation to make, right? We're not saying that this is what the client's going to go ahead with. This is just our recommendation. And how we calculate how much is required for trauma and TPD, it is basically we look at the client's gross salary or the gross income, and we're going to calculate replacing 1 year of the client's gross income. If you wanted to, you could change that to 2 years or 5 years or whatever it is. It just recalculates. And then we add in an extra 20% as a bit of an emergency fund, right? An extra 20% buffer to help your client through that period. So it's basically 1.2 times the client's gross income. Again, you can change or tweak these figures. And below here, it just has, if you want to add in a lump sum, for example, to clear the mortgage, and then we deduct any existing cover. And over here, it just tells you how long would that, how long could you survive off that sum insured in terms of trauma. So that trauma would last you for 2 years. What would you do after that? Perhaps you need a bit more trauma cover, or perhaps certainly you need some income protection cover in place. So that's how we calculate trauma and TPD needs. And again, there's another notes field if you want to add more comments to that. So once you've entered that information, and again, remember this is just a recommendation. We're not saying this is what the client is going to go ahead with. We then go down to the bottom, and I've got two options. I can save and close this this particular client, and I can come back and do some other calculations, or I can do my statement of advice back at the office or whatever it may be, or I can save and quote. So in this example, I'm going to click save and quote, and it's just going to remind me that it's going to overwrite any previous quote that I've done for this particular client. So the only option I have is to say yes. So if I save yes, if I choose yes, go save and quote, it takes me back to the benefit details section, and you will see that it has automatically entered the benefits, and it's also pulled through the sums insured that we're going to recommend for this particular client. And on the right hand side, it has done some calculations in terms of quotes that are available for the client based on this recommendation. Now from here, my suggestion is we don't make any changes to the sums insured or to the benefits, or have a look at this, because your client might not be impressed with paying $700-800 a month. My suggestion is that we move on and we click next. And this will take us into the research options, and I'm not going to go into the research options. We've got other videos that explain these aspects, where you can look at the premiums, the documents, research, head-to-head, and underwriting. I'm going to click next. And this takes us into our report settings. So please have a look at my next video on how we generate the SOA. Or feel free to look through our library of other videos.